Hi y'all! Today I'm going to be showing you how to make any shirt you want. I decided to copy this really cute pattern where it has really flowy sleeves, an underbust stitch, and top stitching on all the hem, but you can really grab any shirt that's your favorite, a material that's similar to it, and I'm going to show you how to copy the pattern. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so the first step is to find the shirt you want to copy. Here is the shirt I decided to copy. It has these cute flare sleeves, but the material's a little thin and it's a little bit see-through. I don't know if you can see that, but I wanted to improve upon it with a thicker material that's a little softer, higher quality, and still get that nice flared sleeve effect. So go ahead and find that. And then also, you want to find a fabric that has about the same amount of stretch. It doesn't need to be the exact same mixture, but you want to make sure it has the same stretch. So when I look at my shirt, I see that it stretches this way. That's the main area it stretches. And then up and down, it has a tiny bit of stretch, but not a lot. So make sure your fabric lines up with that. And when you lay your fabric out to actually cut the pattern, make sure you line it up again. So if it stretches one direction, make sure when you cut the pattern, you're having your fabric stretch in the same direction. So now we're gonna take this and we're gonna fold it so that we get it just along where the seams are. So for this, let's say we're starting with the bodice part. So as you can see right here, maybe if I turn it inside out, we can get a better look. So, turning your garment inside out, you can see where all the seams are. So, at the shoulder, we have a seam, and then right under the bust, I have a seam. So I'm gonna go ahead and fold it so that I can get each of those seams marked. So, since it's symmetrical, we're gonna fold it in half. Gonna lie this part right here on a fold in your fabric, and then we're going to tuck the sleeves under so that we can see exactly where the seam is for the armhole and also the seam along the edge. And so I have some clips for you where I'm going to show you how I do this actually on this fabric, but again, just make sure the stretch lines up and you're marking along the seams that are already there. And so you're going to cut out pretty much every single piece of your shirt and make sure to leave seam allowance.
Okay, so as you can see, I'm taking my garment and I'm going ahead and putting it on the fabric folded over since it is a symmetrical piece. Now my fabric marker was not working super well, so I was creasing it with this tool, but if you have a fabric marker or some pencil, just make marks on your fabric. They're much easier to follow. And so I'm doing this for every piece along the seams. Here I am marking the top part that goes over my bust and going ahead, creasing that. You can mark it with a pencil, whatever you desire. And then I'm going ahead and cutting it out. Do this for all the pattern pieces.
So on these, I did kind of a modified French seam. So each piece has another piece of fabric here other than this one. So instead of just folding it over or folding it over twice and hemming it, I went ahead and sewed on another piece of fabric and then folded that over to hem it. So depending on how you want to hem it, whatever you're comfortable with, just make sure to leave enough seam allowance. But yeah, that's how you're gonna actually copy the pattern pieces. So let's get into sewing. Okay, now that we're onto the sewing, I'm gonna walk you through how we actually sew this together. So the first thing I'm gonna do for mine is I'm gonna look at the front panel. So I have two separate pieces, this top piece that covers my bust and then the other piece that covers the rest of my chest and my waist. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with this middle seam right here that's under my bust. So as you can see, I'm gonna show a multiple clips, but there is this seam right here. So I'm gonna go ahead, lie it right sides together, or I guess lay it right sides together, and then sew that. And then I do really like this top stitch contrast stitching since I'm sewing in black instead of a cream or white. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna go ahead and fold it back over and use this seam as a guide to put the top stitching. So as you can see in the clips, it's really quite simple. You're just sewing along the edge. Now depending on if your shirt is stretched or not, you're gonna need to use either a zigzag stitch or you can use just a straight stitch like this. My fabric is a little bit stretchy, but I found that with a straight stitch, it had enough stretch to fit me just fine. So go ahead and take a tiny bit of your fabric, put a stitch in it, and then see how much you're able to get it stretched with a straight stitch if you're not sure which one you should be using. But for this top stitching, I thought it just looked so much nicer with a straight stitch.
Okay, so now I have my 2 pieces for the front, and I'm gonna go ahead and pin them together. For curved pieces, you're just gonna scrunch them so that they follow each other. I find pinning the center first, and then pinning the edges, and then pinning midpoints between that is super helpful. That way you can feed it through your machine super easily. And of course, you can adjust the pins, reline it up as you go, but definitely start at the center because I find that is the hardest pin to place. Okay, so as you can see, they're connected. I did a top stitch over it, and then I cut out this piece to do the hem. So I'll talk more about this a little later, but this is how I'm gonna do the hem. I cut out a piece that matches the neck hole, and then I go ahead and attach it right sides together. I attach that by sewing along that edge, and I'm doing this placed at the center. Okay, and so after that, I'm gonna fold over this edge, and that's gonna create this really nice hem. And so I'm just gonna pin that all the way around, and then instead of sewing this with my needle centered within the foot, I'm gonna push it all the way over to the right, getting it as close to the right edge of the foot as possible, and top stitch that. So all of my top stitching for this whole project was as far to the right as my needle would go, relative to the foot, and this is just the result of that. You definitely don't need to top stitch. You can do a normal hem. You don't need to do your hem like this. But this is just something that I feel like makes it look a lot cleaner, and specifically on the sleeves, I really like how it looks because it gives it more volume.
Once I had the front panel down, then I obviously had this lovely back panel. And so with that, I was gonna go ahead and start by attaching it at these shoulder seams, and then also along the side seams. I decided for these seams that I wasn't gonna do any top stitching, so saved a little time there.
Okay, so now that you have your front and back piece both hemmed along the neckline, I'm going to connect them at the shoulder pieces. And something that I find really helpful is lining up the hemmed side first, because those ones are finished edges, so you need them to line up in the end product, versus the armhole. I can adjust that a little, I can cut it a little to make them line up, so just line up your hemmed edges first and then sew across. And now that I've done that, I'm gonna also close the edge, so the sides of my stomach, and I'm gonna go ahead and close those. That way I'm just left with the armhole opening on both sides of this bodice piece.
But once you have these two together, then you're able to actually attach the sleeve. But first we need to construct the sleeve itself. So what I went ahead and did is, let me turn this inside out to show you. Okay, so here's the sleeve. It has this lovely seam along the underarm area. And so I went ahead and did that first. And then what you're gonna do to sew it together is you're gonna take the sleeve and the bodice part right sides together like so. So as you can see, I have my sort of like arm into the sleeve, so it looks inside out, but this is the way you wanna sew it. That way, when you do pull it right sides out, you end up with this really nice seam along the edge, and your sleeve is attached like so.
Okay, so now, as you can see, I'm placing my sleeve in just like I showed you in the last video, and just pinning it all around. I recommend lining up the underarm seam with the side seam of the bodice, because those you definitely want to line up in the end product, and then also the very top of the sleeve with the shoulder seam. Then you can go ahead and pin at midpoints and all of that and feed it through your machine. Also, if you're relatively new to sewing, try and check if your machine does have part of the bottom that you can remove, because that will make the little chunk of the bottom of the sewing machine smaller, and it makes it easier to navigate sleeves, especially small sleeves, around it. So just make sure to check that out if you're doing something that's a little bit tight.
So for the hem, as you can see here, there are a few different layers of fabric. So these two layers are actually the first ones I sewed together. So as you can see in the clip, I'm just go ahead cutting out a strip that is the same width as the original sleeve bottom, and then I'm lying them together and sewing them, and I'm doing that right sides together. And then you're gonna fold it over so that you can get this lovely seam where it looks really clean on the outside, and then you're gonna do another top stitch. And I wanna remind you that when you do the top stitch, you want to do it so that the actual sleeve side is up. That way you can see if there's any of this extra part poking out. If any of that's poking out, that's fine, but it looks a little cleaner when it's not. So I just really want to avoid that. So that's a little trick you can use to avoid doing that. But once you go through the construction of your shirt again, you can put all the lovely pieces together. And I really encourage you to iterate on whatever shirt you're copying, because I feel like mass-produced goods can have a lot of shortcuts taken. And so I improved this with the quality of fabric, the kind of opacity of the fabric, and then also the hems I did that are more conducive to actually getting that nice, like as you can see, like the sleeves have volume to themselves, even though it's like hanging and it's not being worn, and I really like that effect. So this is my lovely top that I made. We can cut back to some clips of me wearing it, but thank you so much for watching. Leave any questions you have in the comments, and that's how you sew your favorite top out of your closet. Thank you, bye!